Where to start your quality management system, or QMS. In previous webinars, we looked at using ISO 9001 as a checklist for your QMS. Some of the processes included design, manufacturing, document control, engineering change, equipment management, discrepant material control, customer services, supplier management, training, problem solving, and system monitoring. So many things to cover. Where do you start? This is what we'll discuss in this webinar. How to use the bottom-up approach to define your QMS, how to use flowcharts to develop and improve your QMS, how to compare your QMS against QMS requirements such as ISO 9001, and we'll go over some additional tips for implementing a QMS. Most companies start with a traditional approach, top-down. This begins with a focus on the QMS requirements, then writing procedures to address those requirements. However, the procedures tend to look like the QMS requirements, not the actual work processes. Instead, think we already have a QMS. Since a QMS manages the flow of work and information from customer order to shipping, start by defining your existing workflow. You may start with a customer order, which goes into your design process, which then goes into purchasing, then into manufacturing, then to testing, shipping, and finally to the customer. Hopefully, with a happy customer, you get more orders. The bottom-up approach is a better way to go. This provides a QMS that is more relevant to your organization. It's much easier to implement, and people have ownership of that QMS and buy into it. Flowcharts show the flow of work and information at a management level. Flowcharts help identify risks and opportunities for improvement, and flowcharts make it easier to identify gaps with your QMS requirements. Other advantages to using flowcharts are that they facilitate group understanding and consensus. In the end, the flowchart may not be as useful as the actual flowcharting exercise, but hang on to those flowcharts because they will be useful for training and for QMS audits. Auditors love flowcharts. Finally, ISO 9001 and other QMS standards strongly imply using flowcharts. They may require you to identify process inputs and outputs, responsibilities, sequence and interactions of processes. Building a flowchart. Here we have some symbols that are commonly used with flowcharts. Boxes show process inputs, outputs, and basic work tasks. Responsibilities need to be included. I like to put them in bold so they're easy to find. Arrows show the flow of work and information, and diamonds show decision points. For this order entry, we see that sales receives a customer order by phone. That person then checks the customer database, and if it's an established customer, they enter the order into the system. If not, they start a new customer account and then place the order. As you do your flow charting, identify your management tools such as written procedures, forms, spreadsheets, checklists, reports, websites, software applications such as your material resource planning software, training programs, and other processes that have not been defined but may show up as you do your flow charting. In this first flow charting example, I'm going to show the use of a whiteboard. ABC Inc. is a small company, but growing fast. They recognized the need to get better organized and decided that a QMS was the solution, so the managers gathered and whiteboarded a successful project. Here we have that concept I identified. They did a literature search and a physical analysis, and they wanted to decide if this is feasible or not. If not, they would end the project. If it was feasible, they went on to look for funding. The flowchart was then drawn and reviewed and improvements were made. Now, we've added some things. The concept is identified as before. They wanted to know, was it applicable to the ABC market and to their statement of purpose? If not, they would end or table the project. If it was applicable, then they would continue into the business feasibility review, which included literature search, technical analysis, marketability review, freedom to operate search, and a patent search. If it was still feasible, they went on to seek funding. And if funding was available, then they would go into phase 1, project planning process. They decided that software was the solution. They selected the project management software, Jira, as a management tool. Flowcharts were used to configure Jira, and Jira was also used to manage design process, supplier qualification and monitoring, source and information management, and corrective action. Excel was selected for document control. An important point here is that they defined their process in a flowchart first before selecting their procedure or software. Example 2, you don't always have to start with a flowchart. This machine shop's processes were minimally documented. The owner was tired of being interrupted by so many questions and retraining workers. So they started with detailed procedures, and flowcharting was done as a second process. Procedures were written using their material resource program, JobBoss, and screenshots were used to show which fields were used and buttons to click. Here we have entering into JobBoss, how to do a search, and then which fields to use and which buttons to press. When the procedures were written, they were tied together with a flowchart. So here we have a production flowchart, entering orders into JobBoss. Production planning prepared travelers using the JobBoss traveler procedure. The machinists set up their CNC milling machine for the milling machine setup procedure, and quality control performed inspections for the first article inspection procedure. If they didn't pass, it went back to the machinist. If the part did pass, then it went back to the machinist to continue production and inspections for the sample inspection procedure. Shipping and receiving, of course, ship the product. The important point here is that they started bottom up. They may have started, you can start with detailed procedures, or you can start with a flow chart, but again, starting bottom up is the main point. And this is also very useful for auditors as they can quickly navigate your QMS during an audit. In the third example, we have an existing receiving process. Materials are received in receiving. The receiving clerk compares material part numbers and quantities against a purchase order and writes shortages on the PO. Purchasing releases materials to manufacturing then, and manufacturing builds the product. Non-conforming materials are sorted out by manufacturing. So we have some risk here. Without inspections, bad parts get into production. So it was reviewed by the process owner, receiving, those providing inputs, engineering and purchasing, and those receiving outputs, manufacturing. The group looked for risks and improvements, where errors might occur, pain points, and inefficiencies. Now we have the improved receiving inspection. Engineering prepares quality specifications for purchased materials. Purchasing adds those specifications to the purchase orders, and as before, materials arrive in receiving. Now, the receiving clerk inspects against the quality specification and records the results on a receiving inspection form. If the materials are good, they're released to production. Non-conforming materials are returned to the supplier, and purchasing forwards the receiving inspection form to the supplier. So now we have quality specifications to reduce the risk of receiving non-conforming materials, quality inspections to reduce the risk of non-conforming materials entering manufacturing, and inspection results are communicated to the supplier for their improvement. Finally, a gap analysis was performed. Receiving process was compared to QMS requirements such as ISO 9001, which requires the organization to monitor the performance of its suppliers. Supplier monitoring was added to the flowchart. Now we see we have this added step that purchasing records inspection results in the supplier monitoring system. Some bonus tips. One of the gems I have learned about creating quality management systems is that 90% of the information that you need to document is the information you need to do your work. We tend to over-document our QMSs. Think of your QMS as a collection of processes, not a collection of procedures. And use other management tools besides procedures, such as training, checklists, and software. Visit other companies that have made the quality journey, but avoid copying ISO procedures from another company. Your processes are unique to your organization. Examples might be useful. Start with basic management tools that you have, such as spreadsheets and word processors. Use the right management tools for the complexity and risk of your processes and products. For example, if you're building lasers for eye surgery, your QMS is going to be much more involved than if you're building lasers for a cat toy. If looking for software as a solution, flowchart the process first. So, in conclusion, how to use the bottom-up approach, how to use the flowcharts to develop and improve your QMS, and how to compare your QMS against QMS requirements. Thank you. And if you want more information, you can contact one of us.